Yeah, so you have, I mean, a lot of the reviews of the book have talked about the dark humor, and I think that's probably a necessary thing for the some of the subject matter. There's a story, Afterglow. You have this woman who is she's a drama teacher, maybe by kind of by necessity, but right off the bat, in kind of drowning out her sorrow, she doesn't drink, gin. She doesn't drink beer. She drinks Gatorade. TM or R, in the circle, like the trademark of the copyright. I thought that was pretty good stuff. Um, and she drinks it and she drinks it and she drinks it, and her dad tells her, like, hey, like you need to like eat food. um, what the afterglow is that she literally, in drinking these different flavors of Gatorade, she literally, like, parts of her face and such will turn those colors. And it really is in some ways an absurd story. I got the impression that just out on the West Coast, I think of it like a Catalina Island. I don't know if you ever heard of Catalina Island.
Oh yeah.
Right, but it's some sort of island place, Cape Cod or something like that. And she's kind of toiling in obscurity a little bit. But I was laughing out loud at some of the emails and some of the passive aggressive things from, like, her boss was like, you're some of the effect of, like, your salary is in direct correlation to the amount of work you do, So put on this good play. What what is the dark humor and the title Afterglow? How does that kind of elucidate your bigger points, maybe about, I don't know, about grief? That one's not ostensibly about climate change necessarily, global weirdness, but maybe I'm wrong. uh,
Yeah, I think it actually, in my mind, it is.
sorry, the
Um,
quick question, I guess, would be then, like, what were you going for in making the Gatorade like a physical manifestation, or her, on her face and her body?
sure. I think this is a story where I'm trying to both talk about a really specific individual issue and then also touch on a larger issue at the same time, maybe in an unexpected way.
Sure.
So, on one hand, this woman is coping with her grief by consuming all of this Gatorade, and it's kind of transforming her body in a way, and these chemicals are showing up as colors under her skin.
Mm,
And then, as a kind of backdrop to that, we also have this mention of how sunsets become more vibrant when
so
there's
deep.
more pollution in them, and this kind of toxic presence. And I was trying to create a parallel between how something like a sunset that's full of pollution can be so beautiful and so
Mm,
gorgeous, and also kind of really horrific at the same
mm,
time because it's full of chemicals.
mm-hmm.
I'm trying to create a parallel between that and then this woman's experience where she's kind of becoming this miraculous
Right.
entity by virtue of consuming all these chemicals, and she's doing it because she's upset about the end of her marriage and this kind of toxicity in that sense. And so
Mm-hmm.
the story is trying to create a parallel between those two subjects. And I think the humor is sort of what maybe greases the wheels for
Yes.
me in terms of creating the connection and finding a way to access these heavy topics in a way that is manageable.
Thank you for that explanation. Sorry, remind me the name of the story again. The one with is based on de Tocqueville.
Democracy in America.
Democracy in America, right? That's the name of his speech, I guess, right? Or if maybe a pamphlet or something.
His book.
His book. That makes sense. So we have, Honey is the girl in that story, the young woman. And so, sorry, remind me of the guy's name, the narrator.
The narrator's gender is actually not specified.
Right. And described as androgynous, right?
Yeah. And it's been kind of interesting for me to see what gender people bring to that
Mm-hmm.
character.
Mm.
Um, and I'm gonna keep it mysterious.
I,
But
I I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. No, there definitely are right. To talk about, like, possible homophobia, but very heteronormative to think of the person as a male. Okay, I appreciate that. I wonder more so about, like, this person and we don't even know where the narrator's from exactly. It talks about the accent was likable by Americans, is doing research in the States, similar to de Tocqueville, kind of like a chronicler. But I guess it doesn't really necessarily matter where the person's from. But is there something about being an outsider? I mean, I know you lived in London. I'm not sure for how long. Is there something
Just
about
a
being an
year.
outside? Okay, being an outsider or something that's uniquely American about global weirdness and just about our consumption culture, I guess.
Well, the real Alexis de Tocqueville was French and wrote this really famous book about American society, and that continues to get quoted constantly by
Mm,
politicians in all parties, which is kind of
right.
interesting. And I think that de Tocqueville did have this particular perspective on what was going on. That was unique to him being an outsider,
Hmm.
and him just having a different vantage point. And so I was trying to create an echo of that in this story, where this near future Alexis is kind of going around the country and has this idea to write a book, and is bringing an outsider's perspective upon society.
Hmm. The kind of like the pivotal plot point in that story is Honey is going to go for a process called I guess a procedure called consignment. And I don't know how much you
Mhm.
want to say about that, if anything.
Yeah, I think pretty important to the story.
Right.
In this near future vision of America, there's the possibility for people to um, sell their exterior body. And so just their kind of physical looks to someone wealthier than them who might want a kind of younger body.
Mm,
And it doesn't, it's purely aesthetic. It doesn't
right.
affect, um,
Life
it doesn't have any health
expectancy.
benefits.
Hmm.
It's just about kind of vanity. And so it's a way for cash strapped
Hmm.
young people to make some money. And it was this kind of speculative body switching was a way to think about wealth inequality and opportunity and access,
Hmm.
which are issues now, and our odds are good they're going to be more and more of a problem in going into the future. And so
Right.
this is something that my Alexis is observing in the story.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much in the collection as a whole about commodification of, I mean, in this case, of literal bodies, socioeconomic class. These are people on the poorer end of the spectrum, who are often selling their bodies. Like Honey and her sisters, we assume Honey did, but we don't know for sure. They went through consignment because, they wanted to pay off this bill, pay off that bill. The last story, with the eaters, where the eaters are in many ways the ones who came out on the, with what's the expression about the straw, got the odd straw, or I'm mixing up the metaphors, but but poverty, right? Obviously, those who had the money were the ones who went in the spaceship. Those who, had the money were able to do this and do that. I wonder what you're kind of trying to say about commodification and about social class. You don't paint the rich necessarily as evil. I mean, there's even a part in the finishing school piece where it's like a defense of the rich kind of. But I just wonder about, like, I guess commodification of bodies and of products and how that is related to global weirdness.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to looking at the climate crisis, at global weirding, there's a complicated kind of matrix of structural issues that have created the problem. And
Mm,
one of those issues is um, uh, uh, greed. I think it's just forces of oppression, colonialism, and as I've been saying, wealth inequality are part of the systems that kind of undergird the crisis. And so my stories in different ways are trying to extrapolate those issues and explore them. And I think I'm hoping that they show why it's just so important that we think about how we can reinvent our economic structures, how we can think about our overall value systems, whether we want one single person to have, $100 billion, or whether we should, as a society, just simply not allow that.
Well, yeah, I mean, like we talked about, the first story is called Mobilization, and it's I'm saying something pretty obvious, but it's like, obviously the more and more we just talk about making changes and not doing things, and it gets more dire, right? And it's just about, can we outrun global weirdness like the people in the RVs? Can we continue to plead ignorance, or we can really step up? Encroaching technology for sure is a theme. The algorithm is such a great story on its own. And it's, we hear a lot about the algorithm with, YouTube and Twitter and all the things that get views and likes and all of that. The first line or so is basically that the algorithm even knew the timing of our periods, right? It knew things about whether people were gonna have kids, when they needed sleeping pills, all those things, and it would just show up. And I'm definitely thinking of Amazon Prime and that kind of stuff, right? Just seeing those trucks all the time. It's even used to arrest Inez, who is kind of a Luddite would not be the term, but she doesn't go in for the algorithm. She doesn't go into buying these things, right? But it's, there's so much there about the cycle we get ourselves into where we keep paying, we can't pay enough, we're in debt, and just all of the grief that comes with that as well. There's a great line that is, quote, "The algorithm never sent more than we could handle." Is there a pretty clear connection to like a godlike figure that we're, you hear people say that about God, right?
I think that the characters in that story, which is called "The Future is a Click Away," really start to think of the algorithm as a god that can read their minds and knows what's best for them. And I think that attitude is not uncommon necessarily in our real world. I think about the way people talk about AI all the time as if it is almost mythical in its abilities and possibilities. And I think we give it too much credit. It's these computer systems are made by people, and they reflect people's agendas and biases and limitations ultimately. And I think it's important to not give all of our agency over to algorithms. We have to, keep that agency for ourselves and trust our own instincts and needs. And also I think that story is all about not giving into this kind of cult of convenience, because that might seem utopic in certain moments when an algorithm knows ahead of time whether you need sponges and sends them to you, but you're giving up agency there, and that has long-term costs.
No doubt. Yeah, that story is so skillfully done. And yeah, I was just so struck by that line that I mentioned just about, God never sends us more than we can handle. And just, yes, it's hyperbole, but it's also right on, right? It just seems like in this world we're in, it's hard to do. It's, what is it? Truth is stranger than fiction, right?
Totally.
Man. The story is called Cougar, and talking about like encroaching technology. These are people who suffer from digital disorders. They're at the center, capital C, right? And they're body modifiers. They have titles, like some are body modifiers. Those people who I guess kind of like Instagram model type of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean,
nomophobic. But tell me about that, please.
People have different disorders. And I think as you said, some of the people modify their body to match what they're seeing on the internet, and that is not unknown either. So all of those digital disorders are either they're real, they exist, or they're kind of slightly exaggerated and extrapolated.
Right. Very cleverly placed in the Santa Cruz Mountains right outside the Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, no, phones and all electronics are taken away. and the narrator is is in rehab, like a drug rehab or alcohol rehab, and it's oversimplifying a bit, I think, to say that she wanted attention, but she really she started to get into the world of fraud, and it all started through like a Nextdoor type of app, right? Are you
Yeah.
I don't know if you're poking any fun in Nextdoor. I don't know if you're a Nextdoor devotee or
I mean, so many things in my stories are the products of me synthesizing different things I've
yeah.
experienced. And so yeah, I've spent some time on Nextdoor, and which is both fascinating and disturbing
Okay.
sometimes. And I actually spent a bunch of time in the Santa Cruz Mountains at a writing
Oh
residency. And
yeah.
so that setting is kind of being merged with just other experiences. While I was there, there were a lot of warnings about mountain lions, so
Uh-huh.
I was weaving that in, and
Yeah.
that's how I approach a lot of my fiction. Really taking personal experience, research, and then imagination to try to create a new world that's also eerily familiar.
Oh, exactly. Eerily familiar. So are we talking like Los Gatos area, maybe? Like San Jose, outside of San Jose?
Um, it was in I'm blanking out on
Sorry, no,
the
not to be exact. Not
town.
neither here nor there. I'm just interested, as kind of being close to there. The title is very clever. Hey, hey, the cougar. She's an older woman, older, not that old, but she's maybe mid 40s, and most of the others are in their 20s. Um, and again, it's oversimplifying to say that she wanted attention, but she went into the next door and started kind of like getting the sympathy, the kind of the classic suburban wife in many ways, suburban person who just nothing was ostensibly wrong, but just kind of got addicted to FOMO. I kind of like, or like, the idea of FOMO and just wanting attention. Um, I was gonna say one more thing about that. I forgot. But a lot too about art and about creativity and about things like algorithms taking that away. There's a story called Endangered where there are literally artists in cages. I wonder what kind of statement that is there. Do you are we talking about art being muzzled? Are we talking about artists themselves kind of phasing themselves out? Kind of where are you going with that? And about, I guess, also about people watching, those people watching from outside the cages.
Yeah, so that story, Endangered, on one hand, it is about the precarity of pursuing an artistic career. I think
Mm.
that's a very real thing.
Mm.
But it's also another story that's trying to talk about global weirding in an unexpected way by merging this concept that we usually apply to animals, endangerment, extinction,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
applying that to a group of human beings. And in the story, these artists they're treated like they're endangered penguins or other animals, and they're kept in cages in a kind of zoo-like enclosure. And my hope is that in a way that story shows how problematic it is to deal with endangerment and extinction through zoos and captivity, and to think that that's like any kind of solution, because
Right.
it's I think easier for us to empathize in a way with these people in
Mm-hmm.
cages. We know that that's wrong, and
Sure.
by I think kind of merging those two concepts, I'm hoping that um, the story illuminates both the reality of endangered animals and something about the reality of the economic precarity of being an artist.
It definitely landed for sure. I mean, like so much of our world, unfortunately, misogyny is a big part of the collection. Um, Chevalier, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the name of the town in the story.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Eddie is short for, I'm forgetting, but Eddie, goes out of her way to impress. She has an early dream that she shares with the narrator, her friend as a kid. It's just a recurring dream of invisibilia, right? Of just not being seen, like literally being seen in those dreams. and then she ends up, having a horn, which comes from this early injury, right? And in her small town, she's kind of ignored. I mean, for the most part, she is, but she does the classic, like, got to get out of the small town, goes to New York, and says that she really is like an object of fascination. Does is that why she doesn't? I mean, is that why she doesn't want to leave New York? Is it any attention is good attention? Is it like, hey, notice me, or is that kind of a simple reading of the story?
I think that in some ways that story is mysterious to me as well,
Hmm.
because so much about it is uh, not what you would expect. You would expect the horn at first to cause a sensation, and
Yep.
then you would expect it to maybe blend in the city. But the reverse happens. And in some ways, that maybe that does feel true in the sense that small towns can actually be havens for oddballs. As a,
Hmm.
as someone who lives in a small town, I think I can speak to that. And
Uh,
sometimes when you're a small town person in a city, you can be a kind of oddity in that sense.
I see.
But I think what matters more than the Eddie being perceived by people in the town or people in the city is whether or not she's perceived by the narrator, and
Mm-hmm.
that relationship and their connection is what's most important to the story. And
Yeah.
so one other thing I will say about that story is that it's one of the earlier stories. I wrote that in
Okay.
maybe 2014, and a lot of the other stories I wrote during the pandemic lockdown, actually. So
Mm.
it's kind of it's an earlier one, which meant that I came back to it with fresh eyes when I was
Yeah.
revising the collection. And one of the things that I realized, especially as I looked at that relationship, was that the narrator was in love with Eddie. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't fully that attraction seemed so obvious when I came back to the story and looked at those characters. But it was only kind of through revisiting it as an older, wiser person, and then as
Mm.
a I don't yeah, just some years later that I really felt like I saw that some of the kind of complication between seeing, not seeing had to do with sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of I mean, the story is about about being invisible in many ways, not wanting to be. And yeah, just the scene is so well done by you with the wedding scene, and just like people not seeing her and what's not mentioned and what is. And there's a lot of, I guess, silences or gaps that are really telling in that scene. And that's a heck of a story. That's very interesting. Thanks for that explanation. So the one with the long title, Colonel Meriwether's Intergalactic. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, like you talk about that retro futurism, or right, just this idea of like, a finishing school. I think of like, 1850s London, right?
Mhm.
And Caroline, and just about how there's so many rules for the women, and they need to have a good nature and be graceful, and to always keep their manners, and basically everything is to make the men feel good, right? Um, and so, this we already talked about how the ending of that story is so emotional, but I just wonder about like where misogyny, or where, I guess views of women came in, whether it's that story or just overall, about kind of the expectations that are put on women.
Yeah, I think that I consider patriarchy to be a kind of another one of those underlying oppressive forces that's actually part of climate change, and that's part
Hmm.
of global weirding ultimately. And so the stories all or many of the stories kind of are thinking about patriarchy pretty head on, whether it's the story you just mentioned or something like Loving Homes for Lost and Broken Men.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
And and so like I've said before, I think bringing that element of retrofuturism into the stories was a way to show how important it is for us to really intentionally um, think about how we want our relationships, our social systems to be going into the future, because it's not a given that we're going to keep progressing or growing as a society. We have to
No.
fight for it.
Right. There's always that assumption, right? That as the years go on, we become more progressive, we become more accepting, and we've seen that not to be true.
Absolutely. And I think, you only have to read the newspaper to
Hmm.
see headlines about abortion rights, among a million other kind of terrible legislative things that are happening. And so it's like you said, it's not a given at all.
True. I'm sorry to keep coming back to it. Truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, to read a textbook in Florida that says that, that doesn't mention that Rosa Parks was forced to the back because of her skin color. Like, how do you even? I don't know if you've seen some of those write ups, and it's like, she was determined. It's like, no, like so retroactive, so retrograde, right?
Yeah, and it's really disturbing, and it's really surreal, and
Surreal.
it's interesting. And oftentimes I'll hear that my fiction described as satirical,
Same.
and I kind of chafe against that descriptor, because I think that creates distance between um, uh, the reality of the stories and the reality of our worlds. And I think
Mm,
our world is oftentimes so out of control and absurd that
absurd.
it's more, the things that I'm writing are realer than
Mm,
people want to believe.
that's for dang sure. Unfortunately true. You mentioned the story with the foster. So the woman is a foster wife, basically, right? She's got multiple husbands there. And Mr. Holm,
Mhm.
yeah, right? I mean, what a character, just the way you paint him. And then just that payoff at the end where it's like, oh, okay. He seems so unreal, but I mean that in a positive way, like so perfect. And then in the end, when you kind of find out a little secret or whatever, it's like, okay, okay. But just the way you describe him as a character, and then the other men are, just kind of very just into their carnal needs, is just so interesting, and it's so much in conversation with the idea of, foster parents, and just that she
Hmm.
does that. It's just, you don't need to comment that, other than I just want to say what a darkly humorous and clever and creative story. We've talked about a lot of negative things that come up in the collection. We've talked about impending climate change. We've talked about, poverty and the widening chasm between rich and poor, continuing misogyny, retrograde in so many different ways. Yet in some of your quotes, for the book, um, there's a positivity there. There's an optimism. It's described as a hopeful, speculative story collection. I wonder where you find the hope.
I find the hope in the fact that people do come together in challenging times. And I think that that's been shown kind of again and again after weather disasters or other kinds of crises. People find one another and they support one another, and they care. And I really hold on to that collective possibility. And one of the reasons why I wanted to end the book with that novella, The Eaters, is because that novella ends with a lot of unknowns. We don't know if
Mm-hmm.
these grass-eating zombies are going to stampede and do something terrible, but we also, at the same time, see someone taking a risk to
Right.
reach out, to put aside fear in the service of love. And I think that for all of our human flaws, we also have so many human gifts and
Mm.
potential. And so that's where I draw that hope.
Yeah. Well, I just think of the girl who's not as young, maybe. When they said her age is maybe like 16 or so. With the stuffed animal and
Yeah.
such, maybe you think of her as a little bit younger, but yeah, you just think of like the everyone just yelling, talk about how like a lot of the younger people are kind of toxic and they're screaming and yelling at her, but she, you know, has that stuffed animal. And yeah, that last scene is so moving. Like you talk about, I mean, there's a literal touch, right? There's literally touching and you know, being with each other. And so we'll take that and roll with it for sure. Like you said, it's one thing to be able to keep the happy and the sad and kind of keep those both in concert with each other. This book is not just one thing, it's many things. You could you know, dive in and just read one story and be entertained and get a laugh and also think. You can read the whole collection, and especially in hearing you talk about it, just see those through lines, and you just really see the skill that you have in world building, the skill you have in being, you know, a prophet of our times, and such a great collection. Again, it's called The Last Catastrophe. Tell us about, you know, like a book tour coming up. Tell us about any particular bookstores maybe you might want to shout out. I know we can buy it in many places, and I'll put those links in the episode notes. But where should we buy it, and any tour coming up?
Yeah, I'm doing a grab bag of events over the coming weeks and months, depending on when you listen to this
Are you going in
podcast.
an RV or?
No, that would be
Okay,
fun, but
okay,
I'm doing a lot of events around Ohio. If you go to my Instagram page, you can find
okay,
some information there about different events. In terms of a bookstore, my local bookstore here in Oberlin is Mindfair Ben Franklin.
okay.
So I got to give them a shout. They're
Nice.
both a bookstore and like a general store,
Oh,
which I
cool.
love. And you can order from them. But you know, I of course always support your local indie bookstores
Hmm.
is the way to go.
Awesome. And you know, again, coming up with such an incredible collection, it's already gotten so many, so much positive feedback. So maybe you're just like, "Ooh, I'm gonna take a break." But any maybe future projects you want to talk about?
Oh, well, I'm really excited to work on my next novel, which is going to be multi-genre. I mentioned that it involves Thornton Wilder. It also involves caves. So I'm
Mm,
pretty excited to to dive into the research portion of that. I think I'm going to
yeah,
spend some time in caves.
nice. Well, talking about diving into caves, have you ever been to the cenotes in Mexico, southern Mexico?
No.
It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. They're caves with water. I don't know how to explain them very well. You'll see bats. You know, they're some of the like not like the first tier maybe of, you know, there's like the seven wonders of the world, and there's like, you know, maybe
Mhm.
UNESCO heritage site, that type of thing. So if you ever want to get out to southern Mexico, Cancun area, the cenotes are some incredible caves. But that
Awesome.
sounds really cool. And I know you continue to teach as well, and keep you, you know, keep you fresh with knowing what people are reading, everything like that. I just want to wish you great luck with the Thornton Wilder book. I want to wish you great luck with your tour. And I know it's gonna be busy as heck, but I hope you get to really enjoy it.
I'm going to try it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.